when Titus thrust that sword in the paroiches, blood gushed forth, and the message being, it was like cardiac arrest. It was like a dagger in our hearts. And then we move on to a more intense period of mourning, the 9 days. We don't eat meat, we don't do laundry, we don't bathe. Then we come to Shvuah Shechal by Tisha B'Av, the week that Tisha B'Av falls out on, and it's like Shiva, Le'aleinu. It's like mourning for a dear relative. And then comes Erev Tisha B'Av, and the final Suda, the Sudas HaMafsekes. And Chazal tell us at that Suda, it's like Mesai Muta Lefanav. It's like the body sitting in front of you. And then comes the most wretched day of the Jewish calendar. The day of tears, the day of mourning, Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is such a wretched day that the Navi Yirmiyah, who was born on Tisha B'Av, cursed the day of his birth. First Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash. The Mishnah says at the end of Tainus, 5 tragedies happened on Tisha B'Av. 1295, Jewish community of England was expelled. France was expelled on Tisha B'Av. Of course, the Spanish expulsion was Tisha B'Av. World War I breaks out on Tisha B'Av. And you would expect that after 3 weeks, and then 9 days, and then the week of Tisha B'Av, and here we are, it's the worst day of the year. It's after Mesai Muta Lefanav. You would expect that we sit on the floor and we mourn the entire day. But we have this really strange practice. That comes midday, we get up and we get off the floor and we put on our tefillin and it's like it's all over. What kind of practice is this? On Tisha B'Av, to get off the floor, you can't even give it 24 hours. Give it a day, please. I mean, that's it. A few hours in the evening, a few hours in the morning, and it's all over. We're sitting on chairs listening to lectures. What kind of practice is this? Tisha B'Av is a very difficult day. Every year we read the Kinnos, and we try our best to feel the pain. We try to connect with the tragedies, and at times we're sensitive to it, and we're moved, and we feel the tsar, but we all know that our hearts are so hardened and so coarsened, and we're so jaded. What do Kinnos mean to us? What is their significance? What is their relevance? How does a Yid, how does a Jew in 2017 connect to the Tisha B'Av service? Rabbi Breitowitz tells a story that in 1994 he moved to Eretz Yisrael, he made Aliyah, and being very courageous, he musters up the guts to try to get an Israeli driver's license. Now you have to know most Americans flunk the driving test first time around. And the halacha in Israel is that the tester cannot let on how you're doing and whether you passed or failed. And somehow during Rabbi Wein's driving test, the tester sort of lets on, Rabbi, you know you're a pretty good driver. So Rabbi Wein says, really, what exactly impresses you with the way that I drive? He said, well, Rabbi, you do something that nobody does. You see, most people, they just get in the car and pull right out. But you did something unique. First, you looked in the rear view mirror, and you made sure there was no oncoming traffic, and only then you pulled out. Moreover, Avoisai, that is exactly the problem with contemporary society. Most people think the world began like 20 years ago when Bet Gavrien was built, and it started on 108th Street, and it started somewhere in Kew Garden Hills like 25 years ago, and that's Jewish history. And if a person moves forward without looking back at the past, they're doomed for disaster. We can only be successful in this world if before we pull ahead and know where we need to go, we need to know where we're coming from, what we've endured, what we've suffered. Because if we know where we're coming from, then we could figure out what our role is, what we need to do, and how we're going to get there. And that is the vital role of Tisha B'Av and the Kinnos that we recite on Tisha B'Av. I'm going to try to be brief. I know the schedule is behind. There's a little boy. He's 5 years old. His name is Yisrael Meir. He had just seen his father, the Rav of Pietrikov, being carried away by the Nazis. The Nazis removed him from the shul. He was holding the Sefer Torah, and they bring him out to the Umschlagplatz, to the place of deportation. And this young boy is then separated from his father. His father was then taken to Treblinka. And this young boy, Yisrael Meir, and his mother, and his older brother, they're sitting there in the shul, in the great synagogue in Pietrikov. And in the shul, they're witness to the most inhumane acts. They're Ukrainian soldiers in the shul, and they're looking around, and from the distance, Ukrainian soldier sees a woman holding on to the wooden balcony upstairs, and she's flashing her diamond ring. And the Ukrainian soldier dashes to the woman like a tiger attacking his prey. He calls out to her, "Davai, davai! Give it to me, give it to me!" And the woman is frozen. She doesn't know what to do. And he pounces on her. He throws her to the ground. He stomps on her with his nail boots, and he rips the ring off the finger. That's what the atmosphere was like in this shul in Pietrikov. You have women and children. The men had already been taken to Treblinka. The women and children are in the shul, gripped with terror and fear. In the middle of the night, the doors of the shul swing open, and two Gestapo men, they lit a lamp, they come inside, and they stand at the doorway facing each other. There's a very narrow passageway in between the two of them. And one of them declares, "I'm now going to read a list of names. Anyone whose name I call, get out of here. Schnell, Schnell, out." And the very first name this Nazi reads is Chaya Lau, Yisrael Meir's mother. And she doesn't budge, she doesn't move, because she's waiting for the Nazi to say the names of her two children so that she could leave with her two children. And the German finishes reading the list and only mentions Chaya Lau. Everyone knew if their name is not on the list, their fate is sealed inside. So this German, this Nazi, Yamach Shemai, to them order and discipline is second nature. He calls out one person whose name I mentioned did not step forward. Last chance. Chaya Lau, her maternal instinct is aroused. She surveys the narrow passageway between the two Nazis. She screams out, "I'm coming, I'm coming." And she plans the move quickly and decisively. She understands she's going to have to keep as close as possible to her two kids. They don't need to be told to keep quiet and to try to meld together with her under the coat. They're going to try to get out of there as one. They walk sideways. They're headed toward the door. Somehow the three of them have to pass through the narrow passageway as one body. 5-year-old Yisrael Meir makes it through. Chaya Lau makes it through. And at the last moment, the German notices a little bit more movement than anticipated, and he slaps down his hand, crushing Shmuel behind. And Shmuel has to go back inside the shul. Yisrael Meir is on the outside. His mother is on the outside. Shmuel is on the inside. They never saw him again. Later that day, Shmuel was sent to Treblinka. And as many of you probably know, Yisrael Meir Lau survived that selection. He survived the horrors of the Holocaust. He went on to become Rav in Tel Aviv and later Chief Rabbi of Israel. And the question that plagues Rabbi Lau every day of his life was, why was he saved and his brother perished? Every moment of life, he asks himself, what in the world am I still doing here? How did I make it out? How did my mother make it out? And my brother did not. Not why did God do it to him, but what does God want from him? What is his job? What is his mission in this world? When you say the Kinnos, and you look at the rear view mirror of Jewish history, That is a very serious question that everyone needs to be asking themselves. What in the world am I doing here? How am I still here today? In Mitzrayim, in the Holocaust of Egypt, 80% of the Jewish people perished. But apparently, you made it through. From the narrow 20% that survived, your ancestors made it through. And in the Midbar, 90% of the Jewish people perished. On that fateful Tisha B'Av, when the Meraglim came back with their evil report, somehow you apparently made it through that. Churban Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Sheni, the death toll was 1.1 million. Somehow you made it through that selection. In 1391, 200,000 Jews were forcibly baptized in Spain. 1492, 300,000 Jews lost everything they had. Tens of thousands killed in Chmielnicki pogroms. Somehow your ancestors made through all of these selections. Crematoria, gas chambers. For a Jew to be sitting here this afternoon, it's not statistically unlikely, and it's not highly improbable. It's downright impossible. So how could you not ask yourself, what in the world am I doing here? What does God want from me? Why was I selected? Since time immemorial, Tisha B'Av has always been selection day. From the time of the very first Tisha B'Av, when there was a decree that every last man between 20 and 60 would not make it through the Midbar, do you know what they did on Tisha B'Av? That first year, 600,000 Jews dug their own grave. They were not expecting to get up in the morning, and in fact, the next morning, 15,000 Jews remained dead in their graves. And there was mourning and there was crying throughout the Jewish people. And the next year, another 15,000 perished. And each subsequent year, for 40 years, 15,000 Jews did not make it through Tisha B'Av. Until the final Tisha B'Av, until the last of the 40 years, when there were only 15,000 Jews remaining between 20 and 60, who dug their own graves and were very pleasantly surprised when they woke up in the morning and they realized the decree had been rescinded. And they, together with some children and some teenagers, were zoicha to go into the land of Israel. And when they marched into that land, they walked in biyad rama. They walked in very proud because they realized God selected them. They're the 1% who made it through Egypt and the desert. And you could be sure that they recognized their role and their mission in this world. And they recognized that it was their responsibility to take hold of that land for the future of the Jewish people. But we read from the Torah this morning, here's where the challenge comes. Ki soiled banim uvnei banim. It says the Jewish people in Israel, they'll have children, they'll have grandchildren, v'noi shantem ba'aretz, and they grow old in the land, and they forget where they came from. They forget they were the survivors of the desert and of Egypt. And they began to think, Jewish life began in Eretz Yisrael with Yehoshua ben Nun. They forgot about Mitzrayim and they forgot about the Midbar. They forgot to look in the rearview mirror. And that is precisely the same challenge that we face today. In the 1950s and the 1960s, the next generation after the survivors, they recognized who their parents were. They recognized they were survivors, that they were saved from the horrors of the Holocaust. They had a job, they had a mission, they had a responsibility in the world, that if God selected them, there's a reason. But now we're not the children anymore. Now it's the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of the survivors. Now we're up to kisoiled banim uvnei banim. Now we're up to v'noi shantem ba'aretz. And we forget our past. And we think life begins on 108th Street. And the avodah of reading the Kinnos, and the purpose of reading the Kinnos, is that it's the table of contents of Jewish history, so that we realize and recognize that we are the 1%. We've been handpicked. We've been cherry-picked by the Ribbon Shalom. And that means we've been entrusted with a job, and we all have a mission in this world. I'm going to ask you a big question. You know Moshe Rabbeinu? Remember him? Could someone please tell me why in the world we call him Moshe? That ain't his Jewish name. That's the name, the daughter of Parai, who when she came down to the waters of the Nile, she sees him resting in the crib that his mother made for him so that he's not devoured by the crocodiles. And the pasuk says, "Vatikra Shemai Moshe ki min hamayim v'shisihu." She calls him Moshe because she drew him forth from the waters. That wasn't Moshe's Jewish name. Lahavdil, that's like calling him Kevin, Eric, Jeffrey. That's not the name he was given at his bris milah. At his bris milah, his mother said, Avigdor, Yekusiel, Yehoina son. Why in the world are we calling him Moshe? And that's not the only question. God calls him Moshe. You know, Moshe, he's the typical Jewish son-in-law. He's working for his father-in-law in the family business of shepherding. And one day he's tending to the sheep, and he sees this bush. And the bush is burning. And it burns, and it burns, and it burns, and it burns. In fact, Chazal say that bush was burning for a very long time. And a lot of people saw that bush. And you know what they said? Wow, that's funny, the bush is burning. And they went on with their merry lives. But Moshe said, Asura nava ere hamara hagadol hazeh madua lo yivar hasneh. Moshe said, what's going on over here? Why is the bush not consumed? Let me take a minute off. I know the market is still open. But let me just stop for a moment. Madua lo yivar hasneh. And God comes and he says, attaboy. I've been looking for a guy that stops. I've been waiting for somebody who takes a minute off. Vayikra loy mitoy chasneh, Moshe, Moshe. So God calls him Moshe. Why is God calling him Moshe? It's his non-Jewish name. Call him a Hebrew name. Call him Avigdor, Yekusiel, Yehoina son. I have a friend in yeshiva. His name is Ezra Gwertz. He's the grandson of Rabbi Beryl Wein. He sent me a clip of some type of message Rabbi Wein gave over, maybe at a family gathering. And he answered this question based on something that happened to him. Rabbi Wein says, to make a long story short, whenever he goes to Yerushalayim, he always visits Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial. And one year he was told that there's a new museum, there's a new memorial in memory of the 1.5 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. Now, the number 1.5 million is impossible to fathom. So let's say take about 1,000 rooms of people like this, and then do it another 10 times, and then we're getting there. So there's a Jew in Beverly Hills. His name is Spiegel, Hungarian Yid. 70 years ago, he goes into Auschwitz with his wife and his 5-year-old boy. 10 months later, he comes out all by himself. He comes to the US, he comes to LA, he's a very successful entrepreneur. He owns tremendous real estate holdings. He comes to Yad Vashem, he says, here's $4.5 million. I want to sponsor a memorial for my son, but not just my son, for the 1.5 million children killed in the Holocaust. And since then, he's given over $10 million to keep it up and to endow it. And Rabbi Wein says he goes to the museum with his preconceived notions of what a museum is supposed to look like. Probably there'll be a video there, and posters, and pictures, and pamphlets, and books, and statistics, and he's completely dumbfounded by the experience that he saw. You walk into a room 8 to 10 stories tall, 30 times the size of this room. And the room is pitch black. It's so dark you can't put one foot in front of another. It's palpably black. You could feel the darkness. V'yamesh choshech. And it takes time for your eyes just to adjust to the darkness. And then after you rub your eyes and your eyes adjust, and you look in the center of the room, and you see there's one candle that's lit in the room. And by the genius of the designer and the architect of this museum, by reflections and by mirrors, the one candle becomes 1,000,000 pinpoints of light in that sea of darkness. So you see millions of specks of light in the all-pervasive darkness. And there's a voice heard over it. And there's a tape that plays. And all the tape does is the tape recites names. Hillel Cohen, 3 years old, Vilna. Miriam Goldberg, 7 years old, Sarajevo. Names, 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 endless names until you can't bear it anymore and you run out of the room. And Rabbi Wein said that when he left that room, there's one thought that sticks with him. Hey, I didn't hear my name. I'm of age. I didn't hear my name on the tape. And I said to myself that if my name is not on that tape, then I'm going to do something with my life. I'm not going to give up and fade away in the darkness. If I could take another boy in my yeshiva, then I'm going to do it. And if I could learn another Blat Gemara, I'm going to learn it. And if I could go to another shir, I'm going to go. And if I could give another $1 to tzedakah, I'm going to give it. If my name wasn't called. And then, says Rabbi Wein, I realize why the Ribbon Shalom calls him Moshe. Every time God called him Moshe, he reminded him, you should have been eaten by the crocodile. You should have been drowned in the Nile. And I yanked you out. You could have shared the fate of the other tens of thousands of Jewish boys who didn't make it through. Moshe, Moshe! You're lucky you're here. And then Moshe has no choice but to say, okay, God, you got me. Hineni. Let's do something. Let's get something done. And then I realized that if you read your kinnis carefully and you say the 45 kinnis, going back thousands of years, tragedy after tragedy, Chorban Rishon, Chorban Sheni, crusades, pogroms, Holocaust. How can you not ask yourself, so what in the world am I doing here? How am I not one of those kinnis? How can we not hear the call? Moshe, Moshe, I yanked you out of 45 matzavim, 45 tragedies. Can we get something done? Can we do something? Marva Rabbi, we're in the last generation, we're the Dor Achroin. It's us. No one else is left. 99.9% of Klal Yisrael did not make it ad hayom. And the Rebbeinu Shalom is calling out to each individual, and he's saying, Moshe, I yanked you out of so many things. Can you get the job done for me? Can you cry out to bring Mashiach, please? Can you get the Geula coming? And we have no choice but to respond to that call and to say, Hineni, you got me. You're right. Let me end with the following story. 1946, Rabbi Wein was 11 years old. He's a young boy growing up in Chicago. And his father says, Beryl, we're going to the airport. A great tzaddik is coming in. And all the Rabbanim and all the Yeshiva Bachrim are going out to greet him. He's going to come to the shul. He's going to address us. Who's the tzaddik? Rav Isaac Halevi Herzog, chief rabbi of Palestine. Fine. So all the Rabbanim come out. And they greet Rabbi Herzog, who is a very majestic personality. He alit from that plane carrying a silver cane and a shiny top hat. And he comes to the Skokie Yeshiva, and he gave a shir for the Rabbanim, the Bachrim, the Balabatim, a 45-minute shir in Yiddish. And after the shir, he then says, I would like a word with the young men, and he addresses the young men in English. And he tells the young boys, I just returned from Rome, where I had a visit with Pope Pius XII. And in my hand, I carried a list of the names of 10,000 Jewish boys and girls who were placed with Catholic families during the Holocaust, because their parents did not think they would survive, and this was their only chance of their children surviving. And he turns to the Pope and he says, Pope, these are our children. You're kidnapping them. Give us back our children. I have the list of names of 10,000 Jewish children. Give us back the children. And the Pope flatly refused. The Pope said, I can't even give you back one child. We have a law that once a child is baptized, he can never return to any other religion. Every last child was baptized. We will not return even one child. I pleaded and I begged. And what I'm telling you, I'm not telling you a story. My grandfather met Rav Herzog in the DP camps. Rav Herzog told him that during the war, Rav Herzog went to the Pope and asked him to shut down the gas chambers, and the Pope said, not a chance. And then after the war, Rav Herzog going back to the Pope to get access to these 10,000 kids, and he was flatly refused. And this tzaddik Rav Herzog, he's sitting there in front of these 200 Bachrim. He puts his head down on the lectern, and he wept like a baby bitterly. He says, Rabbi Wein, I was never so frightened in my life. The shul was silent. And then that great rabbi raises his head defiantly, and his face was beet red. He looked like a lion. And he cried out to the young men in the shul, there's nothing that I could do for these 10,000 children. They're lost forever. But young men, what will you do for the future of the Jewish people? How are you going to rebuild the Jewish people? What are you going to do for your children and the children of Klal Yisrael? Says Rabbi Wein, afterwards we filed by this tzaddik, and he looked each and every one of us in the eye and he said, you heard what I said? Are you going to forget what I said? Don't ever forget what I said. And Rabbi Wein writes that his entire life he's haunted and inspired by the words of Rav Herzog. And whenever he's discouraged, and whenever he's disheartened, and whenever he wants to put down the pen, all he could think is the words of Rav Herzog, what are you going to do for the future of the Jewish people? We just spent the morning saying Kinnis. We are the 1% of the Jewish people that remains after thousands of years. Do you hear the cry? Do you hear the call of the Ribono Shel Olam? Moshe, Moshe, I yanked you out of the Nile. I saved you from the crocodile and the waters. Can we get something done, please? Can you get the job done? The Ribono Shel Olam has placed on our shoulders the most important job in the history of Klal Yisrael, to build the third Beit HaMikdash. And that is the job of Tisha B'Av. At the end of the day, you can't sit on the floor, and we don't sit on the floor. We get off the floor, and we dust ourselves off, and we stand on our 2 feet, and we say to ourselves, and we say to each other, and we say to Ribono Shel Olam, you got me. If I'm not in the kinnis, then let's get something done. Let's make this happen. This is the job of Tisha B'Av. May God strengthen all of us. Help us rise up from the dust to strengthen each other, to strengthen our brothers and sisters, to strengthen the Jewish people. Most importantly, our children, the yeshivos in America, the institutions in America, Chazak, Torah Anytime, and all the institutions that are disseminating Torah. May the Rebbe Shalom strengthen us, and may we merit to see the coming of the redemption and the building of the third Beit HaMikdash from Yameinu. Amen.